Welcome to Beyond the Breakwater, where just beyond the crashing waves of fear, discomfort, and doubt lies the greatest potential for life transformation. We want to guide you into the open waters where the calculated risk you take becomes the turning point for you or your organization to thrive. So draw up your anchors and prepare for departure in this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Breakwater. I am here with Ed, and we are joined with a very special guest today, Pete Prochnow.
Hello.
So welcome.
Thanks.
And you are kind of our first ever listener, I feel like.
Yes.
We don't have the data on that, but I would put money on the table that you were.
No, I remember I was going to reach out to Ed, and I kind of remember getting online, and then there was this Beyond the Breakwater thing, and I remember some other videos from a while ago, and I thought, wow, this is really cool. What timing.
It's so crazy.
I was listening actually to Hope Darston, Christian artist, Peace Be Still, which is all about going beyond the breakwater. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah. So I want to get to that part of your story and your introduction into Beyond the Breakwater, what you're doing, why you're here. We wanted to bring you on the podcast because you have a really interesting role. I think you see a lot. You meet with a lot of other church leaders. You meet with a lot of pastors around the state, around the country. Mm-hmm. And so you have this glimpse into leadership and into fears that pastors may have when going out beyond the breakwater, when considering going out beyond the breakwater. I think you have a really strong pulse on that. Mm-hmm. So just to kind of give listeners an idea, that's why we have Pete, you on the podcast today. But before we jump into that, I just kind of want to give people an idea of who you are, your background, and then we'll jump into all of the present stuff with discussion. So kind of where did you start? And we'll kind of I'll jump in wherever.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'm a musician first, and I was actually hoping to hear the theme, maybe do something with it a little. But no, seriously, yeah, I grew up in a church body, and family was involved in church quite a bit, and but always was involved in music. I think I started when I was 3, actually, on violin. And
I didn't know that.
Keyboard at age 5, and
a 3-year-old playing violin.
Yeah, I actually don't
cannot imagine
really
that being
remember
a joyful sound.
But there's a picture of me playing. I don't remember doing that, but piano, yeah. And I didn't like piano at first because you had to read. You had to play all those nursery rhyme songs, and lessons were kind of boring. But then it kind of took off, and I was interested in jazz and film scoring and all that. So became a music teacher. Not a licensed music therapist, but pretty much worked in alternative education in the Orange County schools down in Florida. And that was an amazing job. Talk about getting in the community. I mean, it was all troubled kids. And we used, I was from Orlando, Florida. So there's what's in that community, a lot of media techs and also a lot of musicians and actors. And so we engaged those players to come into the school that we had. We actually built a recording studio in the middle of the classroom. And then we kind of got lucky, but it had an offer from SeaWorld to create a rap video on penguins. I know this is odd. that they used to open the Shamu show. So we had
Do you have that recording still?
Yes, on VHS to show you how long ago that was. And it's pretty cool, and it was great. It was building community within kids that are just they went through so much stuff. Some of them are trouble and had criminal past, but we got them all involved, and we brought in engineers from really all the theme parks and musicians too, and to help with. Someday I'll show you these recorded. I mean, they're pretty cool. And the musicians from SeaWorld were a little fishy, but...
oh, my gosh.
That's so bad.
Pete's going to have a lot of these jokes throughout the next 30 minutes. Just brace yourself.
Sorry. Yeah, jokes going to kick in here. But, yeah. No, we did. So, it sounded pretty good. We had, and these students had some gifts. So, yeah. So, I did some
you
of that.
Always have, that passion or desire to, be in the community and to have that kind of intersection to help those who were struggling? Or when did that become something that was important to you?
I think it was at a young age in Chicago. I can remember my mom going down. We'd go to the homeless shelters, and I was more interested in the instant mashed potatoes they were serving, but I learned a lot actually there. And I don't recall this, but I was very concerned about some of the kids in my class that had nothing. And that kind of kept going even when I eventually got into church work, which I was reluctant, and doing things, like giving coffee away, not necessarily following the principles we always talk about, but doing things in the community in downtown Orlando, and just at the right place at the right time. And it led to every church I've been a part of around the country or university or school, we do those things. So yeah, there was an interest, and heard about Ed, and I think it was about 7-8 years ago, down in Florida, and happened to be up here recording, and visited Ed, and he spent a half day. It was like a cold call, hey, hi, my name is, and I was blown away by that. So took a lot of that back. And
so 7 or 8 years ago, what were you doing from a career standpoint?
At that time, I was director of worship and music down at St. Luke's in Oviedo, Florida.
Okay.
And it's a real big church.
Okay.
It's a big church. Yeah.
Okay. And then I know this about your past, but the listeners don't know this, but you had experience in Disney and in SeaWorld. At what point were those parts of your career, and what did you do?
Well, I played, before I was married, played hotels in the area, played at Universal Studios by the Stunt Show, really cool gig as well, and SeaWorld by Shamu Stadium, and Disney, because I knew some of the execs, played in the exec band, which was a great experience, and that was really into the community as well, helping terminally ill children, and we would do events to they would actually fly a plane up and bring the family down, like a real big plane, not just a little, and put them in. It was a neat opportunity, which led to some recordings. We did a Christmas album in B.B. King's old studio called King Snake, and got nominated for a Grammy, and it was pretty cool. And it was all because of all those things happening. So, and that brought, when I ended up at the church, I used and utilized, work with those musicians, which weren't, many were not Christian. And some I still work with today. They'd come in and, what are we supposed to do? Take our shoes off, like,
right? Yeah.
That kind of thing. And I've got some good stories, probably not for this show, but there's what happened there.
Do you find there's a big difference between working in like the secular corporate space and working for the church?
I think it's the same, different message, different goal. Corporate's about making money. Church isn't about making money. But I call them messengers, music styles, shapes, colors, whatever you do. They're just different messengers for the message that we're giving, proclaiming. So,
what led you into working with the church?
Well, I was asked to go to a task force meeting to create a jazz, reggae, Latin service, like a worship service.
By who?
A group of leaders
like
at a church.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't want to do it, but out of respect, I had respect for a couple of leaders. So I went and said, here's what you have to do. And it's going to cost an enormous amount of money. I'm going to bring in Disney musicians and other great musicians in the area. We need a lot of gear. And somebody was writing a check already for it. Came back the next day, said, well, I need more. And the secretary said, get whatever you need. And that's how I grew up in the church, but I just didn't, it just seemed more like a museum to me. And it didn't seem.
In what way?
There was almost no going in the community. There was no go. It was all about stay, mostly, not all, but most.
Even like at the time that you were a kid, or was this okay.
It always, even as a kid, I remember having chats with my dad about it. It just seems odd to me. You go in one environment, and then the rest of the community is all different.
Yeah.
Why? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Especially like with your exposure as a kid, going to like homeless shelters with your mom, to then like the first time in your like early career working for, it was a school, right? You said it was a school, and
public
like
school, actually,
doing like inner city work almost. And so it's like you were, as we are saying in this podcast, like you're beyond the breakwater. And so to have, I'm imagining that tension where you're like, I'm part of the church. This has been like my experience growing up, and we stay in the church. And now I have all of this experience as well, doing work that I believe the church should be doing, but I'm doing it through like a corporate and like secular world space. It's like, why is the church not jumping in and being a part of this?
Right. Yeah. It was, it's just awkward. It seemed like there were, was us and them kind of thing, and there's not us and them. I mean, yes, we have we're followers of Jesus.
You felt that like way from the church, like that was the church's, like us
more,
versus them?
Yeah, it was more huddling and just by we have to preserve certain things. Now they had a great school there, and that was definitely beyond the breakwater in some ways. And there was, there were eventually some things that really were out in the community and more events, down at Lake Eola, which is the big lake with a fountain. And we used, we used Disney. We actually used like all their cool stuff, and because we had a great connection to one of the top leaders, and to just do like a Christmas thing and pulled in, the mayor, all these famous musicians, and all these people that were part of the community. It was kind of fun. It still goes on now, I believe. It started in 1994, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what do you do currently? What is your current role?
So I work for a church body and help churches get out in their community, kind of community engagement, and then also with their worship needs when they have church on Sunday, and that's primarily what I do.
Okay. So I remember it was like probably a year ago when Pete reached out, and I just remember Ed had come back from meeting with you, and we had just started the podcast, and so like I had imagined, like I told myself, like this is probably going to take a long time for it to gain any type of traction. Like in my mindset, I think I really thought like by episode 100, we might have listeners. And so like, I remember Ed coming back from meeting with you, and he was like, I just met with somebody that listened to the podcast. I was like, what? Yeah. He heard about it and he asked to meet with us. And he just like, Ed, you had shared like, Pete was like really excited by it, excited by the idea. Like you had really like encouraged us. I remember I was feeling like, so like, who do I think I am being on this podcast? And I don't know what I'm doing. I'm super nervous. And you were really encouraging to just like my role in this. And it was unbelievable. And I remember Ed saying like, Pete wants to be a part of this, and he wants to like bring other church leaders into this. And I thought, I'm like, okay, a lot of people over the course of years say that they want to be a part of this. They want to start something. They want to go back into their communities and serve. And it's like, they get really excited and then they leave and it dissipates, and like, we never hear from them again. And I remember having the same thought of like, okay, like this guy said he wants to be in on it and like work with us, but we'll see how long that lasts before we don't hear from him. And here you are today, like you're on the podcast with us today. Like you have been a really like integral part of all of this, meeting with pastors, meeting with church leaders, bringing them for Beyond the Breakwater workshops, and having this conversation, I think unashamedly every single place you ever go. So, I mean, walk us through that whole thing from your perspective. Like, why were you interested in this? What ideas did you have of how you could play a role in it? And are you seeing that like play out in the way that you were expecting?
Well, first, it was a great resource, the podcast and what's happening in Midland, and a great, I didn't really think in terms of principles at that time, and knew it was not just a model, it's what was going on in Midland. And there's just not a lot of churches doing these things at this time, and hasn't been happening for a long time. So to have that resource, and your really good Oprah questions, I call them, I thought this is, and like I said, I had been to Midland, and people I worked with before I came up here would just tell you that's all I probably talked about. It was like, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? So saw it as a great partnership possibility, and knew right away it was going to be. And I figured you guys would go, okay, we got to see what this is about, here. Yeah, how long is he going to hang with this? But I really just wanted to help fire up the boats. And because when I visit, I would say most churches have not turned the engine on in a while. Not all, but most.
So what did prior to the podcast, like part of your role was visiting with churches, correct? And like church leaders. What were your conversations like then compared to now, maybe with this tool?
Well, being able to outline some of the principles, and I keep learning, it's very helpful. And actually my conversations seem to get better. And I notice I'm listening more because we have more and just saying go. Although really that's what this is all about. Just go. Don't think about it. Don't have meetings. You know, when Jesus comes back, most of us Christians are going to be in meetings. You don't be in meetings. Be out in the community. You know, it's just go. It's not complicated. A lot of things can be complicated. You know, doing budgets and all those things, at least from my point of view, they are. This is like, I mean, I can do it right now if you'd like. I will just get up and I'll walk out there and go in the coffee house and ask questions. That's all it is. But it's for some reason uncomfortable.
Why do you think it's so uncomfortable?
Well, there's a fear, which I know it's been discussed in some of the shows, of losing job. There's a fear of losing members. And that's a big one. There's a fear of not really knowing what to do. You know, and then probably the biggest one, there's a fear of failing. And failing's good. You know, lately I've been telling people, we want to fail. You want to fail. Let's celebrate when you fail. Just don't do it again too many times, you know. But failing is, you can't get better at anything without failing. Even as a musician, you don't just keep practicing the same thing over. I mean, we all have done that. And even when you're younger, your teacher's like, you don't practice a part you already know. You practice the part you don't know so you can fail and get better. And that's part of that dream. You got to dream to fail. It's going to happen, and celebrate it. Because then you kind of fine tune along the way, and amazing things happen.
I know we've talked about this in the past, but I wish pastors would understand that, at least my perspective. I think failure is not trying. But if you take a boat beyond the breakwater and it didn't turn out exactly the way that you thought, you learned. That's not failure. That's like, well, that didn't work. We learned something. Let's try something different next time.
Yeah.
But I think failure is when you almost put yourself into a place of such fear that you stay in the harbor. That's failure.
Yeah. It's faith. And even those things, when you fail sometimes, later down the road, you really see how that helped wherever God's leading you. God trims things like sculpting, and you've got to kind of go with it, which is I like to plan and organize, but things almost never happen that way. I could talk about story after story, which I won't, of when made these big plans and then just kind of went after something without really not knowing what I'm going to ask or do, and it just worked out. And it's some of those things many of them are still going on.
Yeah.
See, think about it. If we use the model, if there's a person drowning beyond the breakwater, and you sit in a boat on the dock, sitting on a boat, you're looking at this person drowning and do nothing, that's horrible. But if you fired up the boat and you go out there and say, I don't know what I can do, but I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to see if I can do something and try.
Right.
Maybe you didn't get a chance to rescue a person, but you tried. That's never failure. That's like, Lord, you asked me to go. I went. And I have no idea how it's going to turn out.
Right.
But I'm going to go.
That's right. Yeah.
And I wish pastors could just understand, and church leaders, like, you just got to go.
Yeah.
And show up and see what God does.
So I think like we've been saying this on this podcast. And so this is why I love, Pete, that you're on this, because I think you give some validity to what our experience has been. Because I think if you're listening and you hear like, this is a church with a grocery store and a healthcare clinic and an auto garage, it's like, what? And I think people, when they visit, they're like, that's amazing. And then they leave and they're like, but I could never do that. Like, that's just a you guys thing. Like, you guys are a unique breed. Like, it takes a lot to do this. Like, Ed, you're a unicorn. Like, I don't know how you do what you do. So I want to widen the scope to other pastors that you've been meeting with that you are super encouraged by, because they're doing this as well. So who are some of the church leaders you've been working with? Like, what are they doing? How's it going? Maybe bring listeners into other churches that are in that same space.
So there's a church that has a really wonderful sports camp. It's been going on a little while, but it brings in dozens, if not a couple hundred kids in the Detroit area. And I think that's really going beyond the breakwater. It absolutely is. There's another church that has a food ministry. They're feeding more people either they come in on campus, well, they actually to pick up the food to deliver elsewhere, or they go out to some of the subsidized housing. They're feeding more people than members of the church or members in their faith family, which is really neat. I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Some of the campus ministries too are quite amazing that what the pastors are doing there. Their community Beyond the
Campus
Breakwater.
ministries as in like universities?
Yeah, universities in the state, and they're really some of them are really out there doing amazing things. Yeah.
You said something like with the food ministry, it's like they're feeding more people in the community than church members or faith family members.
Yeah.
Like that is a really big shift in thinking. And I remember, I don't know if it's maybe the same group that we're talking about, but and I think we talked about this on the podcast briefly, but there was a group that had come up for a workshop, and we were listening like, oh, we heard you guys are like really stepping in and serving your community. How is that going? And they had served like double the amount of people that attend at their church, but they felt like they had this like disappointment in their voice to it, because I think that they were expecting that all of those people like come to their church for worship maybe.
Right.
And like, that's just the lens that I think we are constantly in. And so when you report like, oh, there are like 80 people that attend church and we served 350, but we only have 80 people that attend. It's like, no, that's really
That's actually
awesome.
really
Like
good,
God, like used your congregation and multiplied it to like those that are in their community, and multiplied the gifts and equipped your church to go and serve more people than are inside. Like that's a really, really cool thing.
Right. Yeah.
Is there a commonality that you see among all of the churches that you just described doing something?
Well, they take risks and they have the passion to do it. Almost like gazelle intense. I mean, when they go, they run, and they run into walls. They make mistakes. Also, they can, frustrated at times, and it's not working. It's not on my timeline. I hear that with a few of them, but they're patient. They know it's God's timing. But when you really decide to go, and that waiting period too, when you're assessing what are some of the needs in the community, and you're not really sure where to go. And I see a couple of churches where maybe not all the leaders are on board. Some are, some aren't. And I watch that gradually, go in the right direction. And
I think that's an interesting thing too, because I think people might feel like they need to have everybody on board before they make any type of move forward.
Right.
I think it's interesting that all of these churches that you're talking about, like there is resistance. People are opposed to it. They're hesitant to go out with them, but that doesn't stop them from doing the thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Leaders have to lead. I mean, not from behind. You got to go first, and people follow. I do see some of the main leaders sending other leaders and not going themselves. But I'm noticing that's changing a little too, as there's more support, perhaps. That's my job is to support, encourage. Can't do it for them, maybe a little, but really help guide and get them up here to experience this ministry and watch the podcast or listen to the podcast.
Yeah. Are the churches that you're working with, all the ones that you just mentioned, were those ministries that were already like established, or are there any of them that are like new in the last couple of years?
All of them are new but one. And,
Okay.
and that's somebody too I knew who also was down in Florida doing the same thing with some really unique ministry and not getting support. One was I thought was fascinating. I'll share it real quickly. Was a ministry. They realized many of the people in their community work at night, the night shift, single parents, sometimes not, So they were working on developing a daycare from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., not the usual time for a daycare.
Yeah.
And it was a great idea, and it didn't get the support, initially that it needed. But yeah,
It did not get the
It did
support.
not, no.
So is it currently running, or?
I don't think so. I don't know
Okay.
for sure, just because that leader is now up here.
Oh, got it. Okay.
up in Michigan, but I
It
thought it was
is-
a great idea.
Yeah.
Think about some communities. Yeah, who's working at night?
What shut it down?
Funding. It was there was efforts to get grants,
Yeah.
and I'm not really sure beyond that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would. be speculating. Yeah.
It's interesting though, because like all of these ideas you're mentioning are, they're not, okay, like having a daycare of that, if I were to hear that, I would be like, what? Why is that? Is that a good idea? Like, is there a need for that? But they probably went out and listened to what the need was in their community.
Yes.
Same with the sports camp. Like that's a pretty cool thing. And they probably had to like listen in their community. Was this something that is a need? And it seems like it's going really well there.
It is.
Same with food ministry. Like, is this a need in your community?
Yeah.
And so I think there's something to say about like just go and start. And there's something about like listening and preparing, but don't like listen and prepare so much that you never go.
Yeah, you have to listen. You've got to ask the questions. I'll give you one. I think it would be helpful. We met with a police officer a few years ago and asked him to say, and he was a great guy. He was also a fireman on the side, special forces, I guess. I don't remember. I don't understand all his. And real nice guy. We said, okay, what are the needs right here? And we almost kind of were guiding him. We're saying it's homeless, right? And he's like, well, yeah, there's a lot of homeless in our community, but don't help them. We're like, don't help them. Why would you not help the homeless? They don't want help except for the families that are homeless, and they get help right away. So that's not an issue. So we said, what are the needs? So he said right at that moment, I don't know if it still probably is actually worse, the biggest need is families getting kicked out of assisted living and going to their only option. They sold their house. They can't afford to stay in assisted living. So they're going to these extended stay hotels for, small amounts for 30 days. And it's just awful. We're constantly getting calls for all kinds of reasons. And we asked, I remember saying, how bad was this? This is in the thousands, not like 20 people. So when you ask, you find out some unique things. A church asked, and they came up with there was a need for driver's ed, which like, how is that a need? But it's expensive, and they have the space and the type of parking lot to maybe help with that. They thought, because and then if you go in this community, it's all mechanic shops and all about driving something. I thought, wow, that's interesting. So you find out some really...
That's actually a need here in our town. I mean, in Midland, there's a men's shelter and there's a women's shelter. But if you have kids, that has always been a challenge.
Oh.
And I've been in so many meetings over the years of keeping a family together. There's no shelter that allows for like a husband and wife or a mom and a dad and kids. There's no shelter. Not until just recently, the women's shelter expanded, bought a new building and expanded into moms with kids. But there's only so many rooms for moms with kids. But there still is nothing for family. There's no family shelter.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
But you have to be inquisitive about that kind of stuff and learn and step outside your walls. I think that is like the biggest thing that we're asking anybody to do on this podcast is to start listening for those things, because I feel like once you learn them, like it's really hard to look away. And you start to, it's like the shattered glass theory, like once you see something, you see it over and over and over again. Like you don't see like Toyotas until like all of a sudden you're looking for a car and Toyota's like, oh, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. Or a yellow car. Oh, there are tons of yellow cars. And so it's like when you start to look for needs, it's like, oh, there's not a whole lot of places for living for families. Now you'll start to see that over and over again. And I just pray that like the Lord would stir your heart in those things enough to like see the repetition, find a solution, find a team, like, and just go and start.
Yeah. One other really important thing I'm noticing is in order to do that, you got to change your schedule, your regular weekly schedule. As a leader, especially as pastors, things happen and you need to be, part of those. But I'm talking about all the planning and the meetings, all the hours planning for worship and Bible study. I'm not saying don't do that, but trim it half or more. You can. Planning for worship is analogous to creating a movie. You abandon it. I could spend a year on one worship service or Bible study. There's no real formula there. I don't think there is. So go out and don't use that, well, I've got all these things to do. But I see that, well, I've got this. No, cut it. I usually tell them, just cut it, take a day every week, just stop. And if you can't do a whole day, do 2 half days. It's it's just a different way of thinking. Is this a priority?
We haven't really talked about this. This is really interesting, maybe to hear you go a little bit deeper. You talked earlier about fear. Fear prevents a lot of pastors from going. But now you're really bringing in a whole other element that we've never talked about, is what do you do when, like, their busyness of their schedule, or even the leaders not necessarily being super crazy about this, that it gets bogged down in politics, bureaucracy, and then nothing happens. And
Yes.
that happens. I mean, are you finding that as
Yeah.
you go around and talk to
Yeah.
pastors?
Yeah. Certain, not always lay leaders, even staff. No, we have to get these things done. This is why we're here. We're here for only the people that are here inside, not outside the walls. They're not saying it that way. That's how I'm saying it. But yeah, it's really a problem, and recognizing, well, I've got to actually put hours into this, and just knowing what to do. I've gone out in the community with a few now, and we always get, okay, what are we doing? Where are we going? And I just say, watch, and we'll go over here because, by the way, this is like 100 feet from your church. And I'll ask, do you know the staff? No. And I'm thinking, how do you not know the staff at this place that's right next to you? And then we'll go in and talk and ask a question. And it's really neat to see all that happen, and where God takes us on those little trips. And but that's I don't think that's being taught really, and talked about it at places of training, seminaries and universities. The mission minded, it's more, let's help the missionaries, the ones that are doing it, and mostly overseas. Well, what about across the street? What are they like? Chopped liver? I don't understand that.
So share a little more when you take a pastor to coffee house or something local. What's their reaction? Because they're not going in for coffee. You're going in to ask questions or learn more. What's their reaction when you take them in?
Well, they're wondering what to ask. We try to talk a little bit about and just say, maybe ask for, hey, is this okay? I just got a question. What are some unmet needs you see? And most of the time you'll get, and the last couple times, all of a sudden 2 other workers 10, 15 feet away walk in and answer the same question. In a different need. And I'm thinking, well, we were talking to this person. Sometimes when we go in there, it's busy.
So just to clarify really quick, because you're making motions, but for people listening, they're like, wait, they do what? They do what? Like, people just start chattering is what you're saying. You ask and it
go in and
conversation.
ask, what are some needs? Yeah. And then a conversation happens, and they'll often go, who are you guys? And sometimes it's just fun to go, I'm not telling, and just smile. But we're just we're part of the community here, and we want to see what some needs are and see if we can help with that. One I just did, we found out the need was no community, no downtown, and no transportation if you needed transportation. And we drove around and like, there is no downtown. It's just shop after shop, church, school. And then also, they go in and, okay, this is busy. How do we do this? And I'll say, okay, we come back to this one. But we did that the other day, and it was busy. And it was a deli, a New York deli. And we got in there, and I said, we're going to come back to this one. It's busy. And all of a sudden, the lady who happened to be the owner was at the cashier, just opened up. It's almost like she sensed we were going to ask what was needed and start talking about the problems over here and the problem she owned this. And it almost is like I saw one guy with his phone going, trying to write some of this stuff. I said, no, we'll get it. And it was a really cool experience. And when we left there, it was the last place. I said, you guys go back here tomorrow. And she had a really cool last name, but I won't say it. We probably shouldn't say it.
Yeah. So you mentioned that this is like the training for this stuff is absent from seminary. You've mentioned that like people who come out of it, like they don't feel equipped on this mission part. So I think it would be helpful for listeners to hear maybe your input and your thoughts on some best practices maybe that pastors can do, and things like I'm thinking that might be contrary to their thinking or training already. Like you mentioned, like reducing the amount of time that you are in your office or studying or like working on sermon or worship prep. You mentioned going out into businesses and to the place like near your church property, outside the walls, and figuring out what are the needs of the community, what are the needs of the staff there. Can you think of any other, like maybe just mindset shifts, scheduling shifts, workload shifts that might be necessary for people to make this stuff happen?
We've already talked about it on other podcasts, but host your meetings there, not just your, meeting time or planning or writing a message or whatever you do, but do that off campus as much as possible. And the one church recently too, they realized there's a donut shop 24 hours. So they were working on getting their meeting that night over there instead. Be in the community where you can ask and be a part, and they start to see you. So that's one thing. When it's just time to go, don't think about it. Just go. You don't have to have a plan. And it's okay if you go to a town meeting and they let you sit on it. Why are you here? You've done that. Well, I don't know right now, but I'm here. My name is, and listen. Look for unique, if you're at a church or even or another group, find people that have unique talents and see how they can maybe themselves offer to help. We did that with music in Florida. There were a lot of musicians, so we went and played at wine bars, gas stations, usually helping somebody with a medical situation. And playing at a gas station is really unique.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, they first put us by the bathrooms.
I've never seen a band at a gas station.
Yeah, it was it's called a Wawa. It's a real, like one of those big Texas gas stations. And I was like, why are we by the, it's busy by the bathroom. You want to have contacts, but people aren't going to talk to you when they got to go. So so we asked if we could be up front, and they put us by the beer pallet and lotto machine on the way out. And we had all kinds of people come. It was great. I miss doing that with the people there. So, but we got to know staff, which was really important. I've got a lot of stories there. So find people that have everybody has unique skill set that might work in the community. If your community has sports or music, see if you've got coaches, musicians, and see, it has to be good. It has to be very high quality, really. Don't throw it together when you're doing something. People are going to wonder, why is this so good here? We've had some major artists at some of those gas stations or hospital or wine bars. It was pretty neat. Conversations start sometimes a year or even 2 years later with staff. It's that they're trying to figure out who you are, what you're doing, and then all of a sudden they're part of you, what you're doing. Yeah.
And you said a year. Sometimes that takes a while too.
I can remember 2 years staff at the wine bar, just to have, for me at least, and I think others. And that person left and was really sad. Not because it was good, they had another job there, but they were like, well, we don't get to hang with you guys anymore. But yeah, it's amazing, the conversations that come out. And also, I don't know, you don't do it for this reason, but your faith family likes to go to those. Some of them will just go hang out, and they're doing it too.
I could even imagine how cool that would be from like that faith family member of a congregation perspective to be a part of a church where if like you're gifted in music, it's like to be able to express that gift in a meaningful way. Or if you have like a sports ministry and athletics is something that you're really gifted at and you love, like I would be so thrilled to say like, I didn't know that my gift could be expressed this way, like to work for the kingdom of God. Like I thought it was something that only ever could be outside of the church. So to provide avenues for your faith family to participate and for their gifts to be used in a way that's meaningful, I think is huge. It's really big.
Maybe I can share a quick story because it just happened recently. We had somebody new at Pivot Point at our appliance store, and I don't know what brought him to Pivot Point, but it turns out he's a musician, plays piano, and Matt brought him to church that Sunday. And it was the first time he had ever been there. So he's actually a Pivot Point employee, comes to church with Matt Markey, the manager, and fell in love with it. And the following Sunday, Pete was gone, and he's playing piano. So this last Sunday, he played piano, and he was really good.
I heard that from a lot of people.
And he had so much fun doing it. You could just see he was having so much fun doing it, and I thought it was kind of a cool thing. It wasn't a faith family person going into the community. It was somebody who came from the community through a ministry who started playing in church the next Sunday. It was amazing.
Cool.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, and he's really good too. He was a full-time musician.
That's really neat.
And you don't, if you're going to use musicians or artists or media or whatever it is, coaches, they don't have to be a Christian right away. There's no, you don't ask them for their Christian ID. You get to know them, and that's what we're supposed to do. That's part of witnessing. But you got to get to know how are you? Who are you? Any needs? What's going on? Get them where they're going to ask you questions. And that only happens by just getting to know and doing things really well.
Yeah.
That just happens naturally. It's not all the same timing. Sometimes a year, sometimes a day. Sometimes, and this is, I think, the hardest thing to teach, is we might be used for just a few minutes. And then the next person's going to have a year with them. And then the next person's going to have 30 minutes. I don't know. God weaves this master plan.
Yeah, you're right.
That's hard because that's hard to measure. And certain leaders who are often business people want to measure how many people in the pews or how many. It's like, it's more how many footsteps, how many contacts, like you've said on other shows. The 1,000 contact. I think we've talked about that on, saying, it's all about contacts. And let God do the rest. You don't have to, don't analyze success by worship attendance and things like that.
That's really well said.
Yep.
Is there anything either of you want to add? I mean, we're kind of pushing the end of an episode here. Any last questions? Thoughts?
No.
Okay.
Thanks for having me here. It's an honor.
Pete, this is awesome. Thanks for being here, and thanks for everything that you're doing and just being a part of this podcast and the Beyond the Breakwater family. We always give something for listeners to do before they go. I think you know this. So what would you encourage? Like, think of the church leaders that you are meeting with on a routine basis, the ones that are maybe a little bit hesitant, but they're thinking about going beyond the breakwater. What would you have them do?
I would push them to go, just go, and say, hey, we're going to go out in our community. What's the plan? Don't have a plan. Where are we going? Figure that out when you get in the car. Just go. Don't get caught up in the where, how, what are we. You can talk a little bit on the way. Watch what happens when you're driving. You'll find a place. And when you go, don't go too far. Got to take care of our community first before you can help others outside of the community. And often it's right across the street. So don't skip over places. Wow, I don't like McDonald's. No, don't do that. I'm only going to Burger King's. No, go to the one that's right by you, and just see where God leads. It might even be we're just going to talk about where we're going, but we're going to do that at McDonald's. Get off campus and stay off for a while. Yeah.
That's great, Pete. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
We will catch everybody next week. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater, a podcast of Elevate Community Ministries. Don't let the conversation stop here. You can email us at hello@beyondthebreakwater.org. We would love to chat with you, answer questions, plan a visit, and help you take your next step. We'll see you next week.